Welcome, welcome, welcome to April. Oh. Okay, all right. We got a hybrid there. We got a very leonine yawn slash yell. all,
Caught,
all,
busted.
all in one, all in one. It was smooth though. It was smooth. But, well, welcome, April. And first of all, congratulations are in order because you have written and published, self-published your first book, and
Thank
it
you,
is
thank you.
tell the people, tell the children the name of your book.
So my book is called The Whole Truth, and that's whole with a W and
Oh,
parentheses around it.
like that kind of hole,
Mm-hmm.
basically. Okay.
Yes,
So
but
the
imagine,
W,
more warmed up.
so the W goes like this. Hold on, let me center myself. Okay. The W goes like in there in the parentheses, and then
Hmm.
it's HOLE. So it's like a double entendre.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's because the book not only goes over the multiple facets that I took to rid my body of PCOS
Hmm.
symptoms, but also because a major biohack that I introduce through the book is yoni steaming, and how
Hmm.
yoni steaming kind of cut through everything for me in that process
Hmm.
of clearing the body of its dis-ease. And
So can you
so
tell us what is PCOS for the folks who don't know?
So PCOS is polycystic ovarian syndrome. So there's cysts that form within and on the ovaries as the eggs don't actually exit. They just kind of keep getting layered with the nutrients that are supposed to be for that egg that is going to be fertilized. But actually, they just kind of they don't leave the ovary. They kind of just sit there, and lots of women have multiple cysts. So about 15% of the population. And
Hmm.
this book actually works really well because I overlapped within my own body, and I know other women who have fibroids or endometriosis who are able to relieve those issues. Endometriosis, another 15% of the population have that, where the normal lining that forms on the inside that sloughs off during menstruation actually is on the outside of the uterus. So that can be, it can form huge like cramps, lots of pain, abnormal bleeding, all kinds of issues. And then fibroids. Now this one's kind of crazy, but 80%, 85% actually of women uh in that in the fertility range, like who have their menses and stuff like that, they have fibroids, and most people go undiagnosed.
Hmm.
So people can have um I don't know, they come as big as 11 pounds. So people who have that belly size, which isn't necessarily about them being fat, they could actually have fibroids in their uterus. And I had one woman who I know for a fact was able to process her fibroids through some methods in this book.
Hmm.
So instead of having a hysterectomy, over a half a million women a year in the US alone,
Right.
600,000 last year had hysterectomies. And they are not even really putting it out there as an option to do
Right.
yoni steaming. They want to tell you, oh, the danger and this and that's been used for thousands of years. It's a very safe practice. As long as you're not going into the extremes of it, you don't do it when you're on your menses, and you don't do it when you're pregnant. And it's
Right.
a really great way to regulate hormones in your body, calm the nervous system. It's a fabulous technique.
So these ovarian cysts, endometriosis, and all base other illness in that area is appears to be escalating. Do you agree with that statement?
I would absolutely agree with that statement.
And you are a very deep thinker and someone who is decolonized as well in your thought process. And in your own words, why are those conditions escalating?
Well, I think we're finally seeing the ramifications. We're actually, first of all, we're finally listening to women. We never really listen to women, especially Black women. Now, they say that a majority of Black women have fibroids or endometriosis or PCOS, right? But they don't talk about the underlying factors. And what they do like to say is, oh, it's genetic, right? And that's a broad concept that means literally
Nothing.
almost nothing. So
It means we
women
want you to think less of yourself. That's what that means.
because of your genes, right? And then they try to say, oh, it's because you're obese, right? Well, when a family line has been put under a lot of stress, they have quick cortisol responses. So of course the next
Yes.
generations are going to be quicker to carrying extra weight, because that's the number one cortisol response is collect fat, build it,
Right.
so we have a lot of trauma that's stored within our womb space, especially when you're looking at how women were used, not only African Americans were used as property, right? But all women
Mm,
were used as property. Their body, they didn't really have a choice whether or not they were having sexual relations. And
right.
there's some twisted stuff that go even further into it. But I'm focused. My book is written from my brown woman perspective as a Black and
Yeah.
Indigenous woman, because I'm Black and Indigenous, right? So I just
Right.
kind of take a multi-pronged approach at it. And
Yeah.
I also look at the epigenetics of our ancestors and the trauma and the
Mhm.
rape and the just horrible conditions that they were put in, the robbing of children, stuff like that. These things do form dis-ease in the body.
Yeah.
And we need to be able to calmly find a way that
Right.
allows us to process it through the body so that the body can heal itself, versus removing parts of the body, which I'm pretty sure if you're born with it,
It's supposed to
typically
stay
like an
there.
organ, it's a major organ. It's
Yeah.
major.
Yeah, and it reeks of not it's not genital mutilation, but it's deeper. It's vulva mutilation. It's a deeper layer, and and you're on my channel, Extropic Esoterica. So thank you for keeping it esoteric. But I would observe that there are exoteric or physical, like things that are happening here in the timeline, here in linear time, that here in physical reality, perhaps deliberate or perhaps just through selfish carelessness. We might call it externalities. When corporations sort of redistribute their operation costs onto other people, um, asymmetrically, poor bodies, brown bodies, black bodies, indigenous bodies as well. And so I'm wondering if, we've got this epigenetic cause, we have this karmic cause that you speak to when you talk about the trauma that happens in that space. And then, of course, these bodies are going to give us a manifestation of that to process and to clear, because we're clearing collective karma here on the planet. But it's simultaneous to that, we have environmental toxins. We have
Yes.
energy production companies that nationwide have been using indigenous water supplies to uh, very cheaply dispose of their waste, sometimes with government collusion and sometimes claiming it's an accident. We have all these cell towers, we have all these ley lines and this power grid that produces toxicity. And in your opinion, does that connect as well?
Absolutely. There's a whole chapter in my book that's dedicated to how we interact with the earth and how our cleaning products. Well, I go a little bit into
Yeah.
the line with the beauty myth, which is another book that was written, but the entire beauty industry was created and is swarming and riddled with things that cause us disease. And only
Yeah.
now that we're calling out and saying, change these products or we're no longer going to buy them, our company's actually stepping up and changing these products. But they knew they were in cancer tissues and all these other they were cancer causing for quite some time, and they still use the product simply because it's cheap, it's working, it sells, right? And so the 10 to 12 products that a woman's going to use on her body, plus the 5 to 6 that she's using to clean her house, if they're all there to give you and your family cancer, there's something to be said about the responsibility of the companies. But they're not offering responsibility, they're just offering you new smells, right? Which is just
Mhm.
this whole nother situation with our bees. But yes,
New
it's
chemical
it's
smells that
huge.
are really horrible. Like it was some people like you and me can smell the difference. Like we can tell that these new smells have something new that we don't especially like or care for. Now,
Absolutely.
when we're looking what we're living through right now, when you look at the current Holocaust, right? A good portion of the material, something like 80%, goes and settles straight into the gonads, both male and female. And of course that sort of, if you do the mental math on that, it's not really kind of hard to see the priorities of those materials and those experimental drugs that have become so popular for some reason. And so it's hard not to interpret. I live in Virginia, about an hour south of where, in the early 20th century, there were sterilization experiments on Black women that were pretending to be medical experiments, and so you see lots of attacks on women, especially. Women, of course, are more reproductively valuable than men, and there's a certain cadre of people who are in power who seem to me, just doing the math, putting it all together, seem to really, really hate women. And they seem to make that no secret, and they seem to act upon their hatred against women in mass scale fashion. And so, like, those two things seem to be, those two facets of humanity are under attack: are natural reproduction and women writ large. Is everything I'm saying resonating so far?
Yes.
And what would you like to contribute your thoughts to this topic?
So, okay, so birth can be considered itself a trauma, going from the comfortable space of not having to breathe or really try to exist. Everything's good and comfortable for you, and then you're thrust out into this harsh environment, right? And that, coupled with the state of our current society, or the outphasing, it's a really dark place. It's a really uncomfortable place. Now, birth itself has been hijacked. The process, I was talking to another mother today about how it takes so much to release from birth trauma, but they're not even acknowledging the trauma that the mother herself is experiencing while carrying the child, or under the circumstances in which the child was conceived, where the environment was, what external pressures were put on her, because all of those go into the child, not only through hormones and actual transfusion, but it shows up in the makeup of the genetics of the child. So when you have a separation from God, which is basically when you've come into your mortalness and you become aware of your mortalness, and you also have a separation from the mother, there's these really deep seated mother and father wounds, origin wounds, and then worthiness issues, especially since you're put in a place that's still in trauma. Like, it's almost like the human race itself, or the human species, is coming out of its own PTSD of finding out it exists, right?
Right.
And so it's gone through this whole process of, who am I? What am I doing here? What is my worth? And it's tried to form hierarchies as opposed to allowing things to be what they are and how they flow naturally. Now, the older societies, when you look more into the indigenous ways, they were connected with the earth. They did accept and respect the ebbs and flows. Whereas the newer forms, they kind of try to control things
Yes.
in a way that may or may not actually function. And so there's a marriage of the space in between. One moment, please. No screaming. So there's a marriage of the space in between that will bring in the acceptance not only of ourselves and our own value, but of each other's value. And
Yeah.
so, as we step into the Aquarian age, we're stepping into a space of altruism and understanding. But in that space, we still have our temper tantrums. We're still allowing ourselves to release, and we're still looking for someone to actually parent us. So, people are relying heavily on, like, the medical community. They're relying heavily on, let's say, media and social media to somehow dictate how they're supposed to associate with the world, as opposed to going within and finding their foundation, because we no longer listen to that, or a lot of people are no longer listening to that inner yearning. A lot of people are coming online because that's the spiritual nature of it, but a lot of people are avoiding it and keeping themselves so busy that they don't have to look within or feel or do anything that has to do with the trauma. So if you're born in a hospital, guaranteed you're born with trauma. If you're born on
Okay.
this planet, guaranteed you're born with trauma. There's something for you to
Okay.
process. If your parent wasn't allowed to really have food, clean air, water, and survive, or like they were in a state of survival versus thriving, they were under medical tyranny, yeah, you're gonna have some trauma with that. One
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah.
What are you
Absolutely.
doing?
and I would say that one thing that as someone who, let's say, might be like a veteran, and I'm told, I'm getting messages that I'm outmoded or outdated with respect to my thoughts about these issues, because there's this new paradigm that, from my perspective, represents a certain tradition, or a certain convergence of traditions of liberation, of real justice, real social justice, real economic justice, real racial justice, real gender justice, sexual orientation justice, etc., being co-opted and conscripted to the service of Nazi science, basically, and this Nazi science thing that we call allopathic medicine, and that is, an ongoing Holocaust that has picked up pace in the past 2 years for obvious reasons, but that really dates back at least a century, to the early 20th century, when there was a well-funded campaign to stamp out traditional healing, indigenous healing, of all traditions, to make space for this system, this medical tyrannical system that we're currently under. And what these people are doing now is that they're taking the core concepts, or they're taking the language that we were generating when we were building those movements of liberation, and they're mapping it to the particular people who represent superficial diversity. So they say, listen to women, listen to people of color, listen to LGBT, but they want you to only listen to their cherry picked LGBT, their cherry picked women, their cherry picked people of color, all of whom seem to be mouthpieces for white supremacist allopathic so-called medicine, from my perspective. And now, what I really appreciate deeply about your work is that you are reclaiming the mantle of indigenous. And that's one thing that we're not hearing. They seem to leave that out unless it serves their purpose, right? They seem to leave that key one out. And I think there's something so powerful for you about, now that things are shifting and it's time to start healing these aspects of ourselves, healing women, mind, body, and soul, healing all of these aspects of humanity. And straight white men get oppressed too. Let's go ahead and say that there's such a thing as poverty, and there's such a thing as flipping the binary and changing the palace guard, which they like to do every, like 300 to 500 years or so. They like to redefine who's on top and who's on bottom. We've cycled through that many times, and so we're in a curve of that right now. That people are starting to get backlash, or people are starting to feel a different type of oppression that they didn't feel a generation ago. But you see that while we're doing this work, you particularly are stepping up to reclaim and repackage. And now through this book is one aspect of how you are saying, hey, look, your real parent is your Mother Earth. Your real parent are these ancient cultures that are still alive in here today. And saying, this is the fold to step into for your healing. And your response.
Well, it takes a lot of removal of what is, right? When the foundation itself was built a long time ago, and it was built on a rocky, slipshod information at best, to really fully be able to reintegrate, you have to take a step back. And
Yeah.
so, without the triggering of what happened with your parents, or what happened with your upbringing, or the fact that you were adopted, or perhaps your father wasn't there, your mother wasn't there, or removing all of that emotionality and stepping into the, oh, we're human on earth, and how do we best relate with earth? Let's look at the older cultures that have been here longer, that are peaceful, right? Because if you think about it, on a playground, who's the one that's like, gimme, gimme, that's mine? It's all the youngsters, the ones who don't know, right? And so, using my discernment and extrapolating that and looking at the external environment, who's the one that's saying, gimme, 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 this is all mine, I know everything, you don't know anything? It's like, oh, okay, so you must be really young and you're fighting for your position, but you're not actually holding their position.
Right.
And the adults sit there and they stay calm and they say, well, this is how we're going to work in this flow.
Right.
I also look at, because the last chapter is about myself and my experiences within the medical community, and that's actually a small shave within the medical community of living book, and we'll talk about why it's a living book in just a minute. But um, reclaiming sovereignty from the medical paradigm is just reclaiming sovereignty of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of
Yeah.
getting swept away in all of the madness, or the fear mongering, or the light washing, we'll call it, that spiritual light washing of everything, but um that isn't in present moment,
Right.
right? It's all these preconceived, you're not enough, just keep reaching, just keep aiming at this placeholder that doesn't really exist. And the person we have in that placeholder tends to be fake or plastic and all this. And so I think, people are getting discernment. They're getting so uncomfortable. We have all been driven into a point of being so uncomfortable that now we have more discernment and have better, what my old English teacher called was bullshit detectors.
Ooh,
So we can have the ability to see through that and call what resonates to us. Even within
yes.
my book, I like to say that there's several ways to get to the number 9. I'm telling you everything I did, and
Right.
I'm still having room for new chapters that are going to go into this book. You have unlimited downloads when you buy the book, because I want it to expand. I want it to include your process and what you're doing to assist yourself in what's working. And
Mm.
then why did you fall off, right? What happens with the triggers and all the things that are set? It's almost like, yes, no, it's not almost, it is. We've been set up to fail ourselves, but
Yes.
only fail up, because how we're working astrologically and all of these things are put together, it's spinning in one direction. Now
Right.
people can try to throw wrenches in it all they want, but it's going into an altruistic society. The
Yeah.
Aquarian age is here, and there's nothing you can do about it. We already
Yeah.
won. It was written into the template. Now
Right.
it's a matter of us no longer fighting ourselves, and what comes naturally.
Yeah.
Breathing. What comes naturally? Eating fresh, pure foods that make you feel good.
Right.
When we're now having to wake people up out of the cognitive dissonance because they've been put into such a trauma. But
Hmm.
since the earth herself is carrying her children with her,
Yes.
as opposed to getting rid of us, because the earth itself is a very living, very dynamic being,
Hmm.
and she could choose to get rid of the human race if she so wanted.
Right.
We act like it's our choice to be here.
Right.
Right? She allows us to be here. So as we
Indeed.
come into alignment with ourselves, we actually start to come into alignment and hear the processes of the earth speaking through us, the earth
Right.
saying eat these things and not these things. When you're listening to your body tells you what to do and what not to do, and
Right.
what works for your area and what doesn't work for your area. There's all this stuff that people are doing for egoic terms. Like, there is a co-option of this Yoni steam practice, which is purely commercialized.
Right.
They drink wine, they sit there, they party, they talk smack, whatever, and they're sitting on these thrones, but they're not really opening into the space of the body. They're not
Right.
in tuning and realizing and softening and going more into the feminine. And that's what the book goes into. It goes into the shadow work. It goes in how to approach and start to heal, and start to peel back the layers so that you can sit in your power.
Right.
And that just starts with you taking control of you,
Yes.
whether or not somebody's pulling on you or demanding something from you, or attempting to distract you. The medical industry cannot distract you from the fact that you still need to eat. Now there's a whole other campaign that's going to
Well,
say,
but
well, you
did
should
we
be
pause?
eating
We
this.
pause. What's that?
Mhm.
Because yeah, I wanted to draw the point that you were connecting it to Earth being living and Earth being conscious, and then you talked about the book being living, but like you explained why the book was living without pointing out that you had explained it. So I just want to go back to that part for a second, in which you talk about how the book will be growing and expanding and become sort of. It sounds like you want to make it a focal point for almost like community building around women healing women and women healing themselves through, as you said, reclaiming themselves.
Yes, yes. It's very so much a community effort to keep building and growing and expanding, and the acknowledgement that nothing stays stagnant, and the
Right.
only consistent is change, right? And
Yeah.
everyone's voice gets to be heard and say, maybe that part, because it's a multi-pronged book, right? I'm talking
Yeah.
about mental, physical, spiritual, and all the things in between that overlap, right? So, maybe that certain diet stylings didn't work for you, but another one did, which means
Right.
now we can put that option and that space out there for a woman who needs that space. Because I like to give myself permission to change
Yes.
because,
To grow, permission to grow, really. And
yes.
you've given your book permission to grow. And maybe putting your marketing hat on for a second, what tell us about this unlimited downloads thing and how people access that, or tell us a little bit more about that idea in particular and why you decided to do that.
Well, I wanted to keep a living book because I myself keep adding new mantras, keep adding new meditation styles. Things will come up in my physical exercises, new movements, new flows. And it's like these are tapping in and breaking through the fractured parts of the crystalline structure that is the crystal of me, right? So
Right.
let me see if I can put that into plainer English. But when you practice, okay, scientifically, when you practice driving from one location to another, but you use different routes, you actually allow your brain to work through different neural networks and having neural pathways and having to create new and more creative ways. And so you automatically become more creative because you can think about something from a multi-pronged approach. If we
Hmm.
put that, extrapolate that and put that towards our bodies and our self-care and our own health, we give ourselves permission to allow for the creativity of the divine nature of the feminine to actually step into her space of power. And now it's very flow, it's very dynamic. It's not so rigid and stagnant as though old paradigm
Right.
of warped colonialism is created this space like it's this way. There's a hierarchy of races, all these things. Not right now. Okay, baby, I'll put you something in a minute. Just a second. So, you know, I wanted to create a space that was going to grow and change. I wanted to
Yes.
create a space for, because you do the same exercise every day, you're going to only work the same muscles in the body, the
Right.
same, you're only going to stretch the same spaces, the same joints. But if you start incorporating new things, you actually start to work a wide range of emotion, muscles, start working your tendons and all of these things differently, creating spaces where you thought there was none. And this allows for greater collective problem solving overall,
Mm.
greater
So,
health networks within the system, and quicker responses. You're not going to wait until you have cancer in your stomach to realize that eating that food wasn't good for you. You're gonna feel it didn't make me feel good when I ate it, so I think I shouldn't eat it. Let me see if it happens again. Let me see if I eat other things. If it still feels this way, you're gonna become far more in tune. And the yoni herself has a very strong voice, and most women have been suppressed and through generations and generations that they no longer listen to that voice and they say, okay, who's here to control or power or tell me how this is supposed to work? And they want to disconnect from it because it makes them feel more in control, which makes
mhm.
them think, because they assume that power and control is a masculine trait, right? We contribute it
Sure.
to masculine as having power, but we no longer take that power for ourselves. And how powerful is the creation space, the womb? It's
Right.
immensely powerful. It's bringing in the divine into physical manifest, but we have to have sound enough mind and body and spirit connection to actually allow it to come in with its highest frequency or highest ability to step into a dharma, which
Yeah.
is more esoteric, but yeah.
So if we're looking at the if someone's watching this right now and they're feeling resonant to your perspective on healing and they want to purchase your book, could you just for a few minutes explain the logistics of the unlimited downloads? Do you keep an email list to where like people will get a notification whenever there's updates, is it sort of self-serve? People check back when they feel like they want to see if there's an update and then re-download. Like what's the logistics of that part?
Okay, so I will, once you purchase the book, I keep your email. And it's actually, so there's a couple ways to purchase the book. If you purchase it off my direct website, you will get what is there. Okay.
Right.
You will also get, you have to email me separately for this other process. If you go through my funnel or you go directly to Kajabi, I am purchasing the platform on Kajabi. So you have unlimited access to it, which means
Okay.
all the meditations and stuff that come with it for free, All that stuff will be available. So you'll have unlimited downloads of whatever edition. And every single time I make a new edition, I'm
Right.
going to add another PDF to the section that you have access to if you've purchased the book.
Okay.
And so I will be putting out an email every time there's a new chapter or edition, or if there's a revision. Please stop screaming. So if every time there's a new edition, or even if I put out a new meditation, I'm going to put that in an email to those who have purchased. So I highly suggest either going through the funnel and purchasing, which I can put on this
Yeah, we'll put
video
it
and
in the
put below.
description. Yeah.
And I also I also will have a community option where we can start talking about other questions and stuff that people have, so you can do Q&As. So I'm going to do live yoni steaming or womb healings, or even just DNA healings twice a
Hmm.
month.
Okay.
So for 333, you can hop in there anytime. You could ask any question. You could also put it out there, because I do energy healing and stuff like that. I can work that, incorporate that into our sessions that we'll be having twice a month.
Yeah, so it's $33.33, which if it were just a regular ebook, that would maybe sound maybe about a little bit more than what people usually like to
Well,
spend for that.
it's almost a 200-page book, to be honest with you. I
Yeah.
worked on this book hard.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can all attest to that. Those of us who've seen you go through that process. But there's also the value add of the continued, the living book aspect, where you get the updates and everything that you just said in terms of the Q&As, like the continued engagement. In other words, so like it's sort of like it's definitely really good value. Is what it sounds like. Is what I'm trying to say.
I put in what comes with this is you're going to get a growing herb list too, right? So everything I take, you can take, right? But I'm
Right.
going to have the cautionary stuff on there too.
Sure.
But you'll have an herbs list, so you can make your own yoni steam blends. I have seats available if you want to purchase seats, but I also show you free methods on how to do it. This is something that you can take back your health on your own,
Pick your own
through
adventure.
your own means, right?
Yeah.
And so, I really want to encourage people to get into it. And then the two main things that I suggest that you take a look at when you purchase the book is the meditations. Now, the first thing is I release the book to you, right? After you start getting into the book, because I need you to understand epigenetics. I need you to understand that these things are happening inside of you, so that you get yourself in the mental preparation for easier change. So when your mind is in the appropriate, when your mind is in the right mindset, things change quickly. You allow yourself to do things and step into places that you typically wouldn't.
Right.
Now, once your mind is ready, then go into the meditations, then go into the healings. So I'm going to have two meditations specifically. One for those who are oppressed and are carrying the lineage of those who've been like beaten and raped and sacrificed, and
Right.
had their families torn apart. And the other is from the oppressor perspective, where
Okay.
they themselves, the person themselves, don't necessarily actively oppress or not actively racist or anything like that, but they have that in their lineage. There's a lot of apologetic shame and guilt and all these like suppressive activities that happen where people disassociate from themselves because of their ancestry. And so
Sure.
now we want to call people back into their bodies
Right.
and process that forgiveness and process that guilt and process that shame, so that they can. And I would highly suggest, especially if you're a mixed race person, to go
Sure.
through both. To
Well,
go
I
through
think
both.
we all should go through both with what you and I know about past lives. Like I think you got the lineage, you got the karma of your lineage, and you got the karma of the life of your soul.
Absolutely, absolutely. So
But
it's a great technique.
what's and in 5 sentences or less, what is your favorite part of your book and why?
What is the favorite part of my book so far? Right? Because it might change.
Yeah, yeah.
um,
But the book is already in a downloadable form, so as the book that people can download today.
my favorite part of the book, I think, is. Ooh, I like two parts of the book. I
Well, you
like
can have to, that's fine.
Can I
So
like the
let's
whole
give you
thing?
let's
Let me
give you
read you. Chapter one.
let's give you 8 sentences since you have two favorite parts.
Okay. My first favorite part was the hardest part for me to write, which was
Bam.
it's my first the last chapter is about me and my experiences in what
Mm.
happened in medicine and life.
So telling
And
your
that
story.
was yeah, that was really, really hard for me. And I said it's my favorite because it was the most difficult to share.
So it's rewarding when you finish that and you realize that you did inner work. You did your own process of alchemy by creating that chapter.
Yes. I was finally able to say, wow, you did the most, girl.
Right.
and
You did the work,
uh,
girl.
and then my other favorite chapter is uncovering shadow work.
Mm.
And when I talk about how to go into and approach shadow work.
Yeah.
And overall, I really like the entire book because it's written femininely. It's not written
Oh,
masculinely.
can you tell us about that?
So instead of saying, this is the thing, XYZ, now what did you learn? Tell it back to me, XYZ. I make it so that it's kind of like having a conversation and it keeps evolving and getting deeper and deeper. And whether you can exactly spit it back word for word, you don't need to because you've taken in the information, the knowledge. So
Mm.
I gave out samples, like a couple paragraphs here and there to different people, and they're just like, I want more.
Hmm.
You fall into it. So I think the way that it's written, it's it really is it's inclusive, but
Hmm.
it's also
But it's
distinctly
gynocentric.
feminine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it harkens back to second wave feminism, or what they call gynocentric feminism, which is really all about reclaiming femininity and the power of femininity. Whereas even you see now, feminism to some extent gets co-opted to a woman in a pantsuit who likes to drop bombs on brown people in Asia. That kind of thing. So all right, so I think we've done a lot of selling the book. So what I would really like to transition into is Yoni Alchemy. Okay, so let's go deeper into that topic of why focusing so heavily on the Yoni, and in particular the centerfold of your practice being the Yoni steaming. What is the alchemy of the Yoni steam?
So the Yoni herself is I liken okay, so you used to go to sweat lodges very often, and they often talked of the sweat lodge as if it were the yoni or the womb. And
Mm,
then when they further talked about it, they talked about it like the creation space, the
mm-hmm,
cosmos, the dark, deep universe that is full of potential and creation, and all spirits can unfold and become manifest within it. Right.
mm-hmm.
So it's purely spiritual, it's purely space of creation now
Okay.
that each woman carries inside of her body,
Mm-hmm.
whether she can create children or not, whether she's prepubescent, etc., she carries the universe and the potential of the universe within her.
Right.
Now, I was also told that women didn't really need to sweat in the sweat lodges originally, not because they weren't welcome there, but because they already carried the universe in them.
Mm-hmm.
And men needed to go through a little bit more of a process to get out of the physical and into the spiritual.
Yes.
So I also, because yoni steaming didn't come into my practice of ridding myself of PCOS until the last few years, right before I had my child.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized the acceleration and the depth in which I could go once I activated this portal. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's very much so a portal. She very much so has a conversation. And the voice is amazing. So now people are starting to hear their guts, or you hear your stomach, or you'll hear your heart, or you'll feel your lungs constrict or relax, or
Mm-hmm.
but the womb, right? I don't know what it's like to have balls, but I'm pretty sure balls be talking because I watched them. You ever blow on some testicles? Anyway, that's beside the point. The yoni centric space
Balls have a
allows.
very low vocabulary, I'll say.
All right, well, the more
But yeah, they
I
talk.
know.
You call it talking,
but
yeah.
but the womb, because it's infinitely creative. It has so much to say, and it has so much ability to direct manifestation. And
Yes.
so, using yoni steaming, if we look at it from a scientific perspective, what happens when you heat something up? It relaxes the proteins,
Yeah.
it opens things up. And that's what it is. Like, people want to talk about, oh, tight pussy, this, that, you don't want a tight pussy. Tight pussy means that you don't want whatever is happening. Relaxed, aroused pussy opens.
There you
It
go.
becomes juicy and wet. It becomes supple and ready for to intake, right?
Right.
And that's one of the things that women aren't realizing is they're taking in all of this trauma, all of this anger. And apparently there's a lot of anger floating through masculinity.
Hmm.
And it needs to cycle through and out, but women are taking it
Right.
as opposed to and they're not processing it. So the
Hmm.
yoni steaming allows you to open and process and open and release, and it also allows the proteins to open up. And if you're carrying the next generations,
Hmm.
even theoretically, like let's say you were infertile or something of that nature, just softening that allows your DNA for with mind, because there's studies on mindfulness. When you use focus and meditation, you can actually shift how the genetics looks, and this I
Absolutely.
talk about it in the book, right? So you can shift how your genetics is. You can shift your stress responses. You can shift all those abusive cycles. You can release trauma, sexual trauma, anything that you had encountered in this life or past life, what your ancestors carried. And the yoni steaming just facilitates that because it warms everything up. It gives it a louder voice. It brings more blood to that area. And as one cell changes, it influences the cell around it to change, and so on and so forth, until your entire body is then in this new state. And it
Right.
happens faster. And I've noticed in most women who are doing this deep alchemy work, not the ones
Yeah.
who are just sitting on a yoni steam in the shop. Okay.
Right.
You got to be doing the deep alchemy work and the prayers and the mindfulness that come along with
Yeah.
some of the stuff I'm talking about. But they see their parents change, their
Hmm.
relationships with their children change, their children can change as well. And so the whole world starts to revolve around you as opposed to you just doing and doing and going, which is more feminine, is to receive and attract and bring in and call and shift the alchemy and how to dance with it.
Yeah. Well, that's and it's almost like there's an aspect of the alchemy that it's using your own feminine creative space and your feminine creative power to create your own healing. Does that resonate?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Manifest your healing. Manifest a new vision of yourself that is um, beyond the traumas that you've absorbed.
Yes, and you don't have to feel the pressure and the anger and the anxiety and the because they want it seems that with these attacks on women and the attacks on earth, it's just an
Right.
extrapolation of that, right? It's to
Right.
control the feminine, and you cannot really control the feminine. You can do your best to try, but there's always a way. That's why plants will still grow in the middle of a highway,
Yeah.
right? Because they don't need much to survive, and wherever they're going to go and grip and grow. And you yourself, you haven't needed much to survive, but if we really want to get into thriving, we have to let go of the highways we're carrying. We have to let go of those, emotional boulders and things that we have put in our body that we are carrying, that
Yeah.
anger, that resentment, that fear, the shame, the guilt, and actually start releasing into pleasure. And that's going to be along the lines of my next book, is how to release into pleasure. But yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. That sounds really fun. So, what's the biggest thing that you want women to know about their yonis?
Um, Connect with her. She's yours. Period. You can hear all the stories, and you could have been made to feel some kind of way about your yoni, but your yoni is yours. And so if you have some things to unlearn, it's a good time to unlearn them anytime. If you have some things to, if she and you don't communicate, it's a good time to learn to communicate to your womb. We can learn our cycles apart from what medical is telling us. We can learn when we're ovulating. We can learn when we're about to menstruate. We can learn what our body is telling us, but especially our yoni, because she is a gauge for how you're actually feeling. And also, like, your tightness in your jaws and lips and stuff actually mirror the tightness and stuff in your womb.
Hmm.
So if you're holding your jaw a lot, or if you're tensing your lips or your face, guaranteed you're tensing. And if your vagina is telling you let not to let someone enter or not to do something, then don't. Right?
Ooh.
You can say no at any time. Give
Ooh,
yourself
that's
consent to say, give yourself permission to say no, and give yourself permission to say yes.
That's brilliant. I think that's a great spot to end on. We're going to put all of your links in the description at the top of the description box. So if you want to check out April's platform, madefordisgoldenlife.com, and if you want to check out her book, it'll all be right there. It's a living book, and she explained to you all the wonderful value and opportunities for continued engagement that you're going to get through it. And I strongly recommend it. I think that you are a mother goddess. You are someone who is here to very much so restore women and heal women. And I'm thrilled that you have chosen this focus and that you have succeeded, that you've succeeded in this great endeavor that you've been on to self-publish this book. So kudos to you, my sister. And would you like to leave us with a closing thought?
No matter what you're going through,
Well, we've got a little freezing there, so we're having a technical issue. So let's just say that she says, no matter where you've been, I'm not going to put words in her mouth. Thank you again, April, and I look forward to more learning and more content collaborations in the near future. Take care, everyone. Bye.